cross-examination of Sergeant Brown. Did you want to hook it up?
Sure, yes.
And Sergeant, you're still under oath.
Yes, ma'am.
Sergeant Brown, before we return to your questions to Michelle Martens, let me ask, have you been trained in the Reed method? Is that one of the methods of interrogation that's out there?
Yes, sir, it is.
And tell me if you agree with this. A mistake that criminal investigators frequently make is revealing to the suspect the specific evidence that implicates him. Do you agree with that?
To an extent, yes.
But in this case, didn't you and the other detectives get or attempt to get Michelle and to some extent Fabian to say what you already told them had happened?
No, we try to get them to start discussing in detail what occurred in the incident, and we would interject certain things to try to elicit a response from them.
But you told, can you hear me good without the other?
I'll turn the volume up more.
Okay, good. Aren't you the one that told Michelle that her daughter was dead?
I believe I may have.
And wasn't she told before she ever said anything that her daughter had been dismembered?
Yes.
Now, I realize this is a very stressful case, probably the worst case of your career or anyone else. But were words put in her mouth? In other words, she's given facts and then she gives them back?
There were suggestions, yes.
And we went over some of this yesterday, so I don't want to belabor the whole meth thing, but that's one of them where you say, correct me if I'm wrong, on page 59, your daughter got some meth and you guys had it out on the table and she died, am I right? That was a question you asked her, was it?
I believe it was. I would have to refer to the transcript for exact, but yes.
Yeah. And, you know, that was the theory that you and the team were going on. And eventually she adopted that theory and said that's what happened. Would you agree with that timeline?
So yes, after I began my first interview, that lasted with Michelle, that lasted like about close to 2 hours, and then we switched with Fabian, and then I went to talk to Jessica. When I came back, that's when everybody was briefing me about this essentially meth scenario.
Okay. And did you say on page 44, now this is when she was in the bedroom, before she moved her to the bathroom, or is this when she was in the bathtub? Didn't you introduce to Michelle the notions that Jessica moved the body, that she was in the bathroom, and that she was in the bathtub, before she ever said any of those words?
I would have to refer to my transcript, but I believe that, yes, those were suggested.
And at some point she ran with those suggestions, didn't she?
She did.
And the same with the knife. You said on page 44, let me ask you this, because it may just be hard to say, okay? When Jessica and Fabian did what they did in the bathroom, where did they get the knife? And then your next question was in the kitchen? And eventually she tells you they got the knife. Okay, I shouldn't say that.
rephrase the question.
You introduced the words knife and kitchen to her before she answered you with whatever she said.
I believe that's correct.
The same as on page 46, you said, how did they cut her up? You actually introduced the word cut or cutting to her before you heard her say anything of that word.
I believe that's correct.
Now, one of the techniques you used is to make her believe that Fabian already said that you know. He told us how she was killed, and he told us that you knew about it. So listen, or I'm going to stop. Okay, I understand you were threatened to keep quiet. We just need to know from you, all right, what they told you and what you know about how she was killed. You said that to her, right?
Yes, sir.
But the truth is, Fabian hadn't said anything like that. You were just hoping by saying, well, Fabian told us this, to see what her reaction would be.
That's correct.
And one of the things you did was turn her against Fabian so that she would implicate him. Hopefully truthfully, but you're turning her against Fabian, aren't you?
That was a technique.
So on page 50 you say, I can't imagine how you feel. I mean, I'm hurting inside. I want to rectify you, get this situation rectified as best as possible. I know we're never going to bring her back, but we need to get the people responsible for this, okay? So Fabian's like, I didn't do nothing to do this, but we know he's lying. You know he's lying. Did you ask her those questions?
I believe I have.
Now, with hindsight, have you considered the psychological impact to Michelle of the death of her child and the dismemberment and everything else that may have put her in a bad mental state?
I'm sure she was fairly, well, it was hard to determine how she felt at the time about her daughter.
Okay, but do you think just the overwhelming nature of what you had to tell her at some point, that may have made her statements back to you unreliable?
What we know now today, yes.
Okay. And so you asked her on 55, don't you want the person responsible for this arrested? You asked that question.
Yes.
And the next page, we know that you know what they did to kill your daughter. You told her that, right? And you're shaking
Yes, sir.
your head yes. But really, you didn't know what they did. You were trying to find out from Michelle.
That's correct.
Now, page 61, you asked, now is your time to just open up because Fabian already told me what they did, what she did and what he did, and I need you to tell me what you observed and what they told you had happened, okay? I mean, does it make sense to look at and say, okay, why is she on top of my daughter, right? That doesn't make sense. Do you remember that that statement by you?
I would have to refer to my transcript.
All right, but here you're telling her, and it seems like you went back and forth. At some point you say, well, he's not admitting anything, but at other times like this, you say that he's already told you what they did. Did you go back and forth with her?
I did. Again, it's another technique to, if you have multiple individuals that you're looking at, to go in one and say, hey, this individual's, explaining that you're involved in this way, is this true? Or, this individual saying he's not involved, is this true? Vice versa. To see if essentially it would flip on each other.
Now, one of the problems perhaps in this interrogation is you didn't have a clear timeline yet of what happened when. Would you agree with me?
I would say, so clear timeline as far as when the murder and everything happened, correct. We, based off of our canvas, multiple individuals believe that they heard a struggle between 3:40 and 4 a.m. And so that's where we were that's the timeline that we knew that potentially that struggle that they were talking about occurred.
Okay. And that might explain when you asked the question, when did you and Fabian go to his brother's house to buy some weed? When was that? Was that before this or after? Do you remember asking a question like that?
Yes, sir.
So you weren't sure if the murder happened before they left to his family's house or after?
At the time, we believed that it occurred that evening. I was asking that question to get more detail as to, what was happening before and what were you guys are doing.
All right, so on page 77 you say, just so we're clear, you know that Victoria was dead, right? And then you and Fabian left for a little bit to go to his brother's house, is that correct? Then at what time does Jessica carry your daughter down the stairs? Is this before or after they cut her up?
I don't believe that's accurate. We didn't know when she was dead.
Well, let's look at page 77.
I don't have that up. Is this Michelle's transcript?
Oh, okay, yeah, you don't
I
have
don't have
that.
that one.
All right. Well, I guess my question is, do you remember at all, your initial focus is that the murder and the cutting up happened when the neighbors heard something. That's what you just said, I think.
Yes, that's what we were under the assumption of.
But it sounds like there, at least some of the time, you're exploring with her the notion that that Victoria was killed and cut up before they left to his brother's house to buy some weed.
I don't believe she was killed and cut up before that. And I don't believe I was even exploring that.
Okay.
It was a question of just trying to get details as to what they were doing and maybe, what she knew at the time.
Do you remember this question shortly before you left? Because at some point you take a break, you leave to go see Fabian and the others stay there. But
Yes, sir.
did you say after you guys cut the arms off Victoria, cut her leg off and wrapped her up in a blanket and put her in the bathtub, right? Then you went in and made dinner, and what did Jessica and Fabian do? You remember that question?
I believe so.
So there's a lot of information that she's given to suggest she knew what was going on that were given by you to her. Is that true?
That is true.
And doesn't that kind of go against what Reed says is don't give your suspect information. You want to hear the information from her.
That's correct. But to a point, that's true. But if you're talking to someone and they just essentially don't give you details of the incident that you believe happened, it is a technique to interject certain things to see if they, if they recognize that, if it's true, to see how they respond to it.
So, I mean, it was frustrating because you're getting someone who says they don't know anything, and you've got all of this information. So you're trying a different technique to see how they'll respond when you tell them these things,
Yes.
right? But there is a downside to that, as this case proves, is that there are times if the person is unstable in one form or another, and you and I, we're not in the psychology business, but there's a danger that they can parrot back to you your own theories.
Yeah, she did latch on to certain things and then did repeat them back to us, yes.
Okay. Let's go to the defendant's interrogation.
Yes, sir.
And I know you have that there. Before we get into some of the lines, I think you've already explained that as the lead detective, you were getting debriefed of what other officers, detectives were saying, and of course you're a sergeant now, but back then, you know, what's Michelle saying? And that's part of the technique, is you separate people that you think might both be involved and see if you can play one off from the other.
Yes, sir.
Now, when did his interrogation start? When did Fabian Gonzales?
I believe it was sometime 1 in the afternoon, a little after 1.
About 1?
Right.
And it went on till 10 p.m. almost on the nose.
Yes.
But there were breaks in there. It wasn't all 9 hours. It was more like 8 hours of questions. Do you agree?
Yes, there were breaks. There were given opportunities to eat, go to the bathroom, such.
Now, you testified that the reason he was still in his shorts was that it was evidence. That's what he was wearing, and you needed to tag that into evidence. Is that what you were saying yesterday?
Yes, sir. We were going to end up collecting his clothing and have his hands swabbed and collect
Right.
DNA.
But couldn't you have done that somewhere between 1 and 10 p.m., where he's not, you know, sitting half naked? With how many detectives went in and out? Do you know?
There were several.
6 or more. Would you agree? Something like
In
that.
between, yes, in between.
In between, not all at once. You'd
Right.
have Detective Akata in there, and Gunterman, and Shook, yourself,
Yes, sir.
Juarez.
Yes, sir.
Now, the snippets that we saw yesterday were not presented in order, were they?
No.
So some farther back were presented first, and so we're not really seeing a progression of what he tells you, but rather non-chronological. Would you agree with that?
To a point, yes. I believe the last one was his last statement where he said, essentially, you know, I was afraid, that's why I lied to you.
Okay. That last one was the last snippet, is what you're saying.
Yes.
But some of the others are out of order.
Yes.
And much of the information about what happened was given to him before he ever said anything like that. Isn't that true?
Yes.
I mean, for example, on page 91, Detectives Church and Gonnerman talk to one another about, do you want to do the notification, is what Detective Church says. Gonnerman says yes. And then Church says, so here, I'm just going to come out like I told you. I'm going to be honest with you, man to man. Victoria is dead. Sir, I would not joke about that. Unfortunately, there's nothing funny about saying that, and I'm being 100% serious with you, okay? And we're really sorry, you know, to have to tell you this, but did you ever smell smoke? Do you see that on page 91 into 92?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, so that's, what is this term notification? Is that something that is part of the technique of interrogation?
The term notification?
Yeah, because he says, do you want to do the notification? And I hadn't heard that before. What is that?
It's essentially notifying him that Victoria was deceased.
All right.
And again, it's to get a reaction from him, see what their reaction is.
Because up until that time, we saw his statement to you at the scene, and up until page 91, there was no mention that Victoria was dead, but at all. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
And some of the other facts on 97, Gunterman says she now does not have one attached to her body, and I think that was referring to a leg. Do you see that where she tells him about the dismemberment?
Do you have a line?
I don't have a line on that one. How about this one? 117, lines 12 to 15. Doesn't Gunterman tell the defendant that neighbors heard the screaming, referring to the leg being sawed off?
She says you're going to hear it if someone is cutting off a leg.
Okay, so she's, and we'll see a little more detail here, but she's suggesting the theory that the murder took place close in time to the domestic violence, where people heard screaming and everything. The assumption is back then that that's when...
May we approach?
Come on up.
So was that question asked of the defendant?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay. I don't remember which one we were doing. I guess page 213 would be one. Detective Church, lines 11. somebody started cutting up the body of a little girl in that room and packing her up in plastic bags. Is that, was that question asked?
That was.
Okay. Now, remember Detective Gonerman, who I believe was in the room before you got there. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
She asked on page 73, to hurt someone like that and the noise that it would make, and a neighbor hearing Victoria screaming, I'm trying to figure out. The neighbors did. They heard her screaming. Did she say or ask that of the defendant?
Yes.
And did Gonerman reveal in this question on 97, she now does not have one leg attached to her body? Did she say that? Let's see, it's line 20.
Yes, sir, she did say that.
All right. And then 3 lines later, Gonerman says, referring to her injuries, they happened over a period of time while you guys were in the apartment. That's what Detective Gonerman asked.
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
And when you were briefed, you were thinking the same, that that they were there when this happened, when the murder happened.
Yes, sir.
That was your misunderstanding as well.
That's correct.
Now, Gonerman on page 106 says, I have no doubt in my mind that you and Michelle were in the apartment when Victoria died. I have no doubt in my mind. Was that told to Mr. Gonzales?
On page 106?
Line 12.
I don't see that on page 106. Line 12. You said Detective Gonerman?
Oh, it's Detective Church, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Gonerman was in the room, but Detective Church says, I have no doubt in my mind that you and Michelle were in the apartment. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And 4 pages later, we're back to Gonerman. I didn't see blood in the bedroom. And then 112, there was no blood in the bedroom. And 115, we have 2 other apartments right next to you that are describing sounds that would be exactly from that type of incident. Did Church and Gonerman say those things?
Yes.
And that, later on we'll talk a little bit about the grand jury, but that's in part why you testified to the grand jury, that a discrepancy was that he said the fight occurred in the bedroom, but you didn't believe that was to be the case.
Based off the information we had at the time, it was a red flag. We couldn't say that it didn't happen. We just didn't know if it actually happened in there.
Okay. Well, we'll get back to what you told the grand jury, but did Gonerman on 116 reveal, line 24, her leg is not really attached to her body anymore? So that was information given by Detective Gonerman to the defendant.
That's correct. Which was inaccurate because her leg was still attached.
And the next page, 117, there's going to be screaming, and the neighbors heard the screaming before you ran out of the apartment. Gonerman said that, didn't she?
Yes, sir.
And it's true there was screaming before they ran out of the apartment, but you now know that in truth she had been dead for 8 hours or more.
Yes, sir.
On page 121, in response to the fact that the TV was on all night, Detective Gunnerman says, well, the neighbors heard it and it went on for a really long time. Did Detective Gunnerman tell the defendant that the TV was on?
She said, well, the neighbors heard it.
Objection.
And it went,
So do you know, was Detective Gonterman talking about the screaming when she said the neighbors heard it, or the TV being on loud?
she was talking about the screaming.
They were kind of in two different directions, weren't they? She's talking about one thing and he's talking about something else.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's your objection?
It's hearsay. He's talking about hearsay.
We're clarifying what the two people were talking about.
So would you agree that sometimes this happens where two people are talking and one's talking about this, and so it didn't refer to something he said, but to what she was talking about?
No, that's inaccurate. So right before that, Mr. Gonzales He did state that the TV was full blast, but then after that, he says, I really wish I would have heard it. And then after that, that's when she says, well, the neighbors heard it and went on for a really long time. So he's referring to, I wish I would have heard the struggle. And then she says again, well, yes, the neighbors heard the struggle as well.
Okay.
So actually, we're talking about the same thing.
They're both talking about the struggle, not the TV being on.
Correct.
Thank you. Did church say on page 272, it was you and Jessica, Fabian, you had the knife. Did Detective Church ask that or tell that to Fabian?
Let me refer my transcript.
Is the first line.
Yes, he said it was you and Jessica, and then later on, he does say that you had the knife.
Okay. And then the next page, also at the top, Church says, I have somebody in the other room telling me that they watched you cut up the little girl. Did Church say that?
Do you have the line
Line 1?
on 273?
I believe so.
I don't see what you're referring to, sir.
I may have an error there, but when you debriefed, were they and you using things you're talking about from Michelle, and sometimes you didn't get it yet from Michelle, but you're using that technique of, well, we heard from Michelle such and such to see what his reaction would be.
Yes, sir. And again, that is an investigative tactic, is to take a break, talk to your other investigators to see what they've learned during the interview, to see if it's something that we can use during another interview.
Now let's look at the next page, 274, line 12. This is before you ran, knocked the shit off. Is that what Detective Church said?
Do you have a line, sir? Oh, I see it.
12.
Line 12. Yes, sir. That is Detective Church.
And this this reaction was because you knew that the murder did not happen after he ran for the police. That was not a possibility. Would you agree with that?
That she was murdered prior to that?
No, that the murder took place after he ran, after he jumped off the balcony.
Correct. That's not a possibility.
Part of it is because just all of the things that were done would take a long time.
Yes, sir.
And, all right. I think on 280, Detective Church says we've been at this for almost 4 hours. Is that your recollection of the time as well?
Yes, sir.
And Detective Church on 282, line 11 says, hey, you're fast forwarding to about 2 or 2:30 in the morning. That was the question asked by Church to the defendant.
That's correct.
Did Detective Church on 284, line 10, say, you were there when Jessica laid on top of Victoria and killed her? Was that asked or told?
Yes, sir, that was.
And then just a couple of lines down, when she laid face to face with her on the bed and killed her. That was said.
That was, sir. Yes, sir.
And then 2 pages later, 285, line 2, I don't think you killed her. I know Jessica killed her, but I know you were there. I need you to tell me what happened. Did church say that?
Yes, sir.
And this is where you come in on page 303. You've been with Michelle for about 2 hours, and then this is when you come in to see Fabian Gonzales. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
And you say, hold on, you're not telling the truth, all right? You know why? You know why I know that? Because I talked to Michelle. Did you say that to him?
I did, sir.
And did you say, I know she's telling the truth? It's 304, line 3.
Yes, sir.
And this, one of the snippets was, the last snippet was actually the third in time.
Yes.
And that's the snippet where Gunterman said her limbs are coming off. Isn't that true?
I can't remember the snippet that she said that in.
Okay, fair enough. Let's look at 304, line 6. This is you. Yeah, we've already talked to Jessica, and we know that you were involved in helping. But this is where it differs, okay? Jessica said that you did participate, but that you participated at your own will, all right, on cut, on dismembering. Hold on, let me finish. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, sir.
And what you were doing there, now Jessica hadn't said anything. She knew to ask for a lawyer right off the get-go, correct?
That's correct.
And Fabian, he could have stopped this interview at any time between 1 and 10 and said, I don't want to talk anymore. Couldn't he have?
That's correct.
And you would have said, all right, we're done. And you would have had to leave it at that.
Yes, sir.
But you were suggesting that Jessica was telling you that he had helped her.
Yes.
She didn't actually tell you, well, it wasn't you anymore. I guess it was another detective, but it wasn't until 2018, 2 years after this statement. Is that correct?
That's
As
correct.
you understand it?
Yes, sir.
So you said, the same page, line 23, stop. I know you helped cut her up, but I also know that you guys were threatened, all right? Did you say that to him?
Yes, sir, I did.
And one of the techniques that you're using is saying, well, just tell me that what you did, you were threatened, and that'll kind of give you an out. But at the same time, you're going to get the person, if they've committed it, to admit, oh, okay, yeah, I did it, but I had to.
That's correct.
Now, did you say on page 314, line 10 and 14, you said the iron, a knife, or the iron? Actually, I'm sorry, you said the iron, and then Gonterman says a knife or the iron. Do you see those two?
Yeah, prior to that, Gonzales says, and she was trying to use the iron to take off her leg, and then that's when I said the iron.
Because that sounds kind of ridiculous that somebody would use an iron to cut off a leg, right?
It was odd, for sure.
And Gunterman introduced the concept of a knife into this conversation just a couple lines later. A knife or the iron? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now you say on 317, line 4, I've already talked to Michelle, all right? She even lied too. She was saying, oh, we had nothing to do with it, and then she finally came clean. Do you remember 22? Michelle said you cut an arm off. That was Detective Gonerman, but I believe you were in the room.
That's correct.
Okay, and then you're saying, the next page, 320, line 12, we went around for almost 2 hours with her. Same thing, I didn't do it, I didn't do it. Do you remember saying that?
Yes, sir.
Then you asked, is there any reason why your DNA would be on her arms? Did you ask that? Twice, in fact. You said it there and then the next page.
Yes, sir.
And then again the next page. Check her out, and so your DNA will not end up on her at all? Was your question?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, well, I'm not going to ask that about the DNA. Line 329, line 20. I'm asking you, dude, what did you see Jessica do with the body parts? Did you ask him that?
You said line 20?
Line 20, page 329.
I said yes. I said, what did you see Jessica do with the body parts?
Now, at 3:30, you said, you said, I never told you bags. Do you remember that question?
Do you have a line?
3:30. Don't have a line. I never told you bags. You thought you were getting new information from him.
No, I don't believe so, because on line 7 of page 330, I said then she put them in a bag, so that wouldn't make sense.
All right, so you told him bags, not the other way around, right?
Yes.
Okay. Goncherman on 333, line 1, you're not telling us everything because her arms are effing missing and her leg is missing and she's been effing butchered. And I know you saw everything and you can describe it. Did Goncherman give him that information?
Yes, sir.
And later in there, she says, I know you were there and I know you had a part in the physical part of it. Did Goncherman say that?
Yes, sir.
Did Goncherman say on 336, line 20? Let's go forward to 342, line 24. So we're very clear about what happened in the bedroom, what happened in the kitchen. The only thing you're not being very clear about is the part where you guys are in the Victoria's bedroom because you're claiming, oh, I didn't see this and I was in the hallway. Did she say that?
Yes, sir.
And so what you're trying to clarify is not the domestic violence that occurred in the master bedroom and the living room and the kitchen, but what happened in Victoria's bedroom and what he might have seen in there.
That's correct.
Now, you were in there when Goncherman told Fabian to sit down and listen, even after there was a concern that if he didn't admit, he was automatically guilty. Isn't that true?
You have a page.
Page 344, line 14.
So line 14 on page 344.
That's the defendant, and then doesn't Gonnerman, instead of reacting to someone that is afraid, that he has to say something, told him to sit down and listen.
She said, well, wait a minute, sit down, listen to me.
Right. Was that the right reaction to somebody who tells you that he has to give you something or else he's automatically guilty?
I don't understand the question.
Well, doesn't it sound like he's being coerced at that point? Either he gives up something or it's over. And you used that technique throughout this interrogation, didn't you?
What technique?
The technique of, if you don't give us something, you're going to go down for this. The others won't.
No, that's not true.
All right, well, let's see a little later on. Let's look at 351. Line 5, was Victoria alive while this was happening? You were there when Detective Goneman asked that.
I actually asked that question.
Oh, okay. Because we're still in the mode of the domestic violence being related to the murder, is that correct?
Correct, and we're still trying to determine when this murder occurred.
Understood. Did you ask on page 357, line 8, why are you saying that you jumped off the balcony when we know that you actually walked out of the front door? We have witnesses that saw you walk out of the front door with Michelle. And Michelle said the same thing. She oh, he didn't jump off the balcony. Did you ask that question of the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Did you say at 361, I'm done with you right now, and I'm giving you the opportunity one last time to tell me what really happened. If not, then I'm going to leave, and you know, I'm going to do what I have to do. Did you say that?
Yes, sir.
And 2 pages later, but we know that you participated. She already explained that you did, but there were threats made. You're denying that. Did you say that to him?
On what page?
That one was page 363, line 18.
Yes, sir.
And you describe the threat on page 372. What's going on right now is Michelle has signed a criminal complaint for you for murder, tampering, and all this stuff. And actually, that was Detective Shook that said that.
That's correct.
Shook said she just provided a statement that's corroborated by evidence that's putting you in jail tonight. You're going to MDC on murder. Okay, yeah, buddy. How does that sound? Yes, you, okay? That's what she's saying. That's what you get for sitting here and lying to us for 7 hours. Did he say that, 374? Line 1.
Yes, sir.
And then Shook says, the next page, line 7, this, I ran to the neighbors. She's actually in there telling me what you did. This happened. You were there, and this and stuff is matching up, said Detective Shook, didn't he?
Yes, sir.
And this team was Shook and Wadez that was going through this phase of it, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you will sit here, like page 376, you will sit here and you'll say this thing and that. You fast forward, sir, guess who is getting charged with the homicide? Did Wadez say that to Mr. Gonzales?
Yes, sir.
387, why are you so concerned about when Jessica comes in and hits you with the iron? How about this little girl? How about her? Let's talk about that. Did Juarez say that to him?
Yes, sir.
Page 390, 23. What do you think? We're going to let everybody walk away from here and be like, okay, cool. We'll call you when all the DNA comes back and all the fingerprints are registered. Did Shook say that?
Yes, sir.
Page 393. Listen to me, stop talking about after. We're going to talk about what happened before and what happened during. Because if we're not going to talk about this, we are walking out of here and you're going to jail for homicide. So you decide. Did Juarez say that to him?
Yes, sir.
Did Shook interject on the next page, line 16? I don't give an F about an iron or anything else or cigarettes. Did Shook say that?
Yes, sir.
And did Juarez on page 405 say, I guess what Michelle just told us, you, Michelle, Jessica, and Victoria all did meth together, so you and Jessica could rape that little girl. And Michelle watched you have sex with her daughter, so we are going to get a warrant to swab your penis. Did Juarez say that to him?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you did get a warrant to swab his penis, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
Did Juarez add on 409, you were in fault. And listen, there's a huge difference between looking at felony murder or first-degree murder as opposed to maybe something like, you know what, shit went wrong, we made a poor decision. You're either looking at life in prison as a child killer and possible a child rapist and mutilator. Did Juarez tell him that?
Yes, sir.
On page 411, line 11, you can spend 5 years or you can spend eternity, but you're the one that makes the decision. We can't do that for you. So until you want to be honest, you might as well kiss your ass goodbye. Did Juarez tell the defendant that? 411.
Yes, sir.
413. This is a high-profile case, okay? It's getting a lot of attention, okay? That paper is going to get floated around NBC, okay? And how do you think that's going to make your visit there when you go on to DOC after court and you're convicted? Did Shook say that to him?
Yes, sir.
The next page, 414, line 4. So what's going to end up on that piece of paper is all the BS lies you've told us, the truth that she's telling us, the truth that Jessica is saying. And then you're going to be the guy sitting down there with 16 different stories, and this lie, and this lie, and this lie. Did Detective Shook say that to him?
Yes, sir.
Page 437. You're starting from point A and going to Z, and you're forgetting everything in the middle, and that's what we want to know. Did Juarez say that to him? 437.
Yes, sir.
Okay. 438, top line. But when you're passed by the whole homicide, and that's the reason we're here, I don't want to hear about the rest, said Detective Juarez.
Did she? Yes.
And then 467, line 4. My understanding is Michelle said that meth was given to Victoria to relax her, and that yes, indeed, you and Jessica did have sexual intercourse with her, and that kind of turns her one, and then she had intercourse with you. Was that said?
That was, sir.
And then the next page, is there going to be your DNA or Jessica's DNA on this little girl's vagina? And whatever is answered now, if there is, how do you explain that? Was that a question Detective Juarez asked?
Yes, sir.
On 469, Juarez asks, when the autopsy is performed, if your DNA comes back, you cannot go back. Did he say that? 469:24.
Yes, sir.
472:15. Detective Shook said that after you came on her stomach, after you And then Detective Juarez says, after you ejaculated on her stomach. And then Detective Shook says, yeah. And Detective Juarez says, okay, listen to me real quick. Then Jessica carries her to the bathtub, severs her arm off. Did Detectives Shook and Juarez say that to him?
Yes, sir.
And then Juarez says, then you guys proceed to clean up the apartment or attempt to, and then you make some tacos, you guys have dinner. Did Juarez say that?
Yes, sir.
Did Shook, 7 lines down, say, your concern should be that you stuck your penis in a 10-year-old girl, blew your semen on her stomach, and then you guys chopped her up into pieces, and you're concerned about tacos. Did Detective Shook say that?
Yes, sir.
On page 475, line 7. Did Detective Shook say, so you're 100% positive that her mother, the mother of a 10-year-old that's cut up into pieces, is sitting in there telling us that she goes on to Fishbowl looking for people like you to go over and smoke meth and fuck her daughter so she can get off watching that shit and then fuck her. This woman is making this stuff all up, right? And no scientific evidence is going to come back. There's not going to be any of your semen on her stomach. Her vagina is not going to be torn up from having sex from an adult male. All of this stuff is just a freaking miraculous lie, and she was chopped up into pieces and you didn't see a thing, and you just got beat over the head with an iron. That's your story? Was that what Detective Shook said?
Yes.
And then the next page. Does it bother you more that she's saying that you had sex with this little girl, or does it bother you more that she is saying you helped kill this little girl and dismember her? Did Detective Juarez ask that of the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Did he ask on the next page, you need to explain why this little girl's DNA is going to be on you. Her blood is going to be on you. Did Detective Juarez say that?
Yes, sir.
Did he say on page 479, you're telling me lies and we have evidence to prove it, and all this is going to make you look like a monster. Did Juarez say that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. 482, line 4. I know that when you met Michelle and you began to have sexual relations with Victoria, and this is how I know, you guys would get high on meth and that you would have sex with her, and hold on, because Michelle says she enjoys watching it. Hold on. I don't want to hear lies, okay? So here's the deal. This is what happened. You guys get her high. Jessica's already talked to Inaudible, and their stories are the same, okay? Was that asked of the defendant?
Yes, that was Detective Okada.
By Okada? Is that a he or she on Okada? Is it a she?
It's a she.
Did she also say, line 20, so you guys take her in the room, her room, you get her high, you have sex with her, and Jessica is holding her down and Michelle is watching, but this time something goes wrong. Look, I don't think you're a bad dude. Did Okada say that?
Yes, sir.
Did she ask on 483, line 18, why would your semen be on her stomach? Was that asked by Detective Okada?
Line 18, yes.
20. And then line 24, same page. Answer my question. Why would your semen be on the stomach of a 10-year-old little girl? Because there's how many people in the house? 4. Victoria, she's dead. Mom, Michelle, Jessica, none of them are males. Whose male semen was found on Victoria's stomach? There's only one male in the house. Did Detective Okada say that?
Yes, sir.
Did she say at page 485, Michelle finds men that will have sex with her children because it turns her on? Was that said?
Do you have a line?
485, line 3?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then same page, line 7. In whether the defendant should have thought that Victoria was a normal girl. No, you didn't, because you've been having sex with her daughter for almost a month. Did Akata say that?
Yes, sir.
And did she also say on line 21 of that page, it's very sad that both Michelle and your cousin Jessica came clean. And I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't look any better for them because of what they did. But the one person that is going to get hosed in this case is you, because you're a liar. Did Okada say that?
Yes, sir.
485?
Yes, sir.
Did Okada say, not only did you do it, but we have proof that you did it? Did she say that?
Yes, sir.
Did she say on 46, we wouldn't be here if we didn't? Come on. Did she say that?
What page?
46, line 8.
Yes, sir.
On 487, line 26, Akata. Okay, so how did she get semen on her stomach? It's a very simple question. You were the only male there. Did Akata ask that question?
Yes, sir.
On 499, line 9, did Akata say, let me ask you a straightforward question, okay? After you guys got Victoria high, don't give me the, oh my gosh, I'm so shocked look, okay? You need to listen to what I'm saying. After you got her high and Jessica was holding her down, where were you guys? What room were you in? Did Okada say that?
Yes, sir.
Did she also say in the next page at the top, no you weren't, because not only did you have sex with Victoria, but 20 minutes after you had sex with Michelle. You know how I know that? Because Jessica and because of Michelle, both said it. Did Okada say that?
Yes, sir.
On 505, just a couple more. Line 6, we have enough evidence, we have enough probable cause to believe you were involved in this homicide, okay? We have enough. That's why we've been here for 7, 8, 9 hours. We have enough. Did Juarez say that while Okada was in the room?
Yes, sir.
And then on page 507, did Okada say, line 2, 2 people 100% came clean, and you're a liar. So you're all 3 being charged and you're going to jail. So you're probably going to face the big charge because you don't want to be truthful. They might get a littler sentence because they were honest, okay? But you're going to be the one that looks like the monster. You're going to be the one that looks like the liar in front of all of these jurors, in front of all the news media that's going to be there when your ass is sitting there in court because you chose to lie to us when we gave you every opportunity in the world. Did she say that?
Yes, sir.
Now, you testified at the grand jury on September 9th, 2016, which was 2 weeks after the murder. Judge, is this a good time for a break, or do we want
We're checking with the jury. Does anybody need a break? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. All rise for the jury.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Sergeant Brown.
Good morning, sir.
So that was a very dramatic reading that we just heard of some of the questions that were asked of the defendant. Sounds like there was some frustration on the part of the detectives in this case. Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir, that's correct. Yes, sir.
And we heard, I believe it was Detective Shook, say something about, you'll say this thing and then fast forward 6 hours. Did you hear that?
Yes, sir.
And then Detective Shook said, you're going to be the guy sitting down there with 16 different stories, and this lie, and this lie, and this lie. Did you hear that?
Yes, sir.
And then Detective Juarez said, I don't believe you because you're starting from point A and you're going to Z.
Objection leading.
Overruled.
And you're forgetting everything in the middle. Did you hear that question?
Yes, sir.
So, Sergeant, can you walk us through, and you said this was about an 8-hour interview, is that about right?
Yes, sir.
Can you walk us through and give us some context to those questions and the frustration?
Yes, sir. During the interview, there were times where it was explained that there's no way that the way he described the fight, essentially. He said, that it happened very fast, and then he exited, Michelle exited, and that did not match up, one, with the time frame that was given. Again, he was still, at one point it was like around, I think the latest was 2:30 or so in the morning. Again, that still had to match up with what we were hearing from the witnesses that testified, and that also we identified during the canvass, saying that they heard screaming between 3:40-ish and 4 o'clock. So his time frame and his details of what happened were like very summed up, and we kept kind of asking him to explain, kind of walk us through detail, but he never would. It was very, very summed up and quick, and again, that was a red flag to me that he's leaving things out that are very important to the case.
So you talked about this gap in time.
Yes.
That basically was an unexplained gap in time.
Yes, sir.
Was he repeating that gap in time over and over and over again?
He did.
Did he tell you that, now I'm going to tell you? Did he say things like that?
Yes, sir, he did.
And then did he end up telling you?
No.
So you got the same story over and over again? Is that
Yes, sir. It wasn't towards quite a ways into the interview that's when he admitted, okay, yeah, I saw it. I should have done something about it, but I was scared, and that's why I lied to you.
Now, a lot of the frustration we heard there at the end in particular came from detectives Shook, Juarez, and Akata. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, Detective Shook came in to the interview. He checked the transcript. Would that be Detectives Shook and Juarez came in at page 368? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the questions that Mr. Aarons was reading from Detective Akata came later than that?
That's correct, sir.
Now, yesterday, we heard several statements from the defendant.
Yes, sir.
And the defendant answered, I don't know what she was using, but all I know is when Detective Schurz said, "What was it, a knife?" And the defendant said, "I think." And he said, "She might have had a knife. She might have had a knife." It was one of the ones from the kitchen.
Yes, sir.
What page was that on?
That's going to be on page 252, where Mr. Gonzales says she had a knife. It was one of the ones from the kitchen. So he's very specific that it was from the kitchen and not anywhere else in the house.
So that's long before Detective Shook and Juarez and Detective Okada even entered the room. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, when is the first mention of a murder charge in the interview?
It appears it's at page 385 with Detective Juarez. She says, so you need to be honest or guess who's getting charged with homicide.
So again, that's long after the statement we just talked about. Is that
That's
right?
correct. Yes, sir. Many, many hours after that.
And then we heard another clip yesterday where the defendant, he was asked, so what did she do with the body parts? He said, I don't know what she did. Well, she said, all right, I'm going to put them in a bag. And I was like, you know, whoa, what the hell, I guess. What page was that on?
It's going to be on page 324. And that was, he said, well, she said, all right, I'm going to put them in a bag. And I was like, whoa, you know, what the hell, I guess.
And you said Detective Shook and Juarez did not come in until page 368, is that right?
That's correct.
And then we heard another clip. And the defendant essentially said that he saw Jessica do it. And he just didn't want to admit it until now. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Could you look for the word admit? Or admitted?
Yes, sir.
Tell me what page that's on.
Do you have the exact phrase I can search? There's quite a few admits.
Okay. Let me give you something that's a little more unique. I've seen Jessica do it.
Okay. Yes, sir. That's page 305. Ms. Gonzales says, I've seen Jessica do it, okay, but she threatened me that I'm going to get killed just like she threatened to kill Michelle. I've seen Jessica do it. Yes, I did. I'll be scared for retaliation.
And is that around the time that he said that he just didn't want to admit to it? If you turn to page 306.
Yes, sir. He says, oh, what I'm saying is I seen it happen. I just didn't want to admit to it right away. But I didn't have no part of it. But yes, I did see it, and I got threatened with my life.
You said that was page 306.
Yes, sir.
Now, there was also a time, and we saw this in the video yesterday, when the defendant had a sheet of paper, and he was making stabbing motions.
Yes, sir.
And then he made stabbing motions on the paper.
Yes, sir.
Is that contained in the same discussion near the 306? If you turn to page 308, does Detective Gonterman ask him to draw the cuts and show what he saw?
Yes, sir.
And again, that's before Detective Shook and Juarez came into the room,
Yes, sir.
and before a murder charge was mentioned.
Yes, sir.
I want you to look up some words for me
Yes, sir.
in the transcript. I want you to look up abdomen.
Okay.
Organ,
Okay.
heart,
Okay.
chest,
Okay.
stomach, and middle.
Okay.
Now, of all of those words, what is the only word to appear in the transcript?
Middle.
And who said Jessica was cutting in the middle?
Fabian Gonzales.
So was that suggested to him in any way?
No.
Now, in fact, he didn't change anything he said after Detective Shook and Detective Waters came in the room, did he?
That's correct.
So he wasn't pressured to say anything.
Correct.
And did you find this defendant to be suggestible?
No, sir.
You mentioned that there was, I believe it was Detective Gonterman said that Victoria's leg had been chopped off. And she was wrong about that.
That's correct.
Did the defendant say anything about her leg being chopped off?
No, sir.
Did he adopt that wrong statement?
No, sir.
At one point, Mr. Ahrens read a question from you in which you said you were going to leave the room.
Yes.
Is that a threat?
No.
Is ending an interview a threat?
Not at all, sir.
Mr. Ahrens also asked you a question in which you said that you had witnesses that saw Mr. Gonzales go out the front door.
Yes, sir.
Did you have witnesses who saw Mr. Gonzales go out the front door?
Yes, sir.
You heard Mr. Ahrens read a question in which Detective Gonterman said, "Sit down and listen." Did Detective Gonterman say anything about if he doesn't talk, he must be guilty?
No, sir.
I want to talk about just interrogations generally.
Yes, sir.
Okay? In your experience, when you have a homicide suspect come in for an interview,
Yes, sir.
do they tend to give all information and all detail immediately?
No, sir.
Is it typical to have long interviews?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is it typical to have interviews in which some details are provided or very few details are provided at the beginning, and over the course of the interview, additional details start to be revealed?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And so in your experience, is it easier for subjects to admit to small things before they admit to big things?
Yes, sir, it is.
We also heard a question in which I believe there's some mention of whether Jessica Kelly did all of this. Did you think Jessica Kelly did all of this at the time?
No, sir.
Was that similar to the interrogation technique that you told us about yesterday in terms of giving someone an out?
Yes, sir.
Who introduced the idea of Jessica coming down the stairs?
That was Fabian Gonzales
And when did he do that?
during the initial interview.
Didn't he even interrupt you and say, before I talk about the fight, I want to talk about the stairs?
Yes, sir, he did.
Now, during the course of the interview, as Mr. Ahrens explained, you didn't know when the homicide occurred, did you?
That's correct.
In fact, just some of the questions suggest that you and the other detectives thought the homicide may have been closer in time to the fight.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you believe that Victoria was dead when she came down the stairs?
We didn't have any idea at the time, so no.
And so who first associated the stairs with the homicide?
Fabian Gonzales first associated Jessica bringing her down the stairs with the homicide.
We heard mention about how sometimes you don't introduce facts in an investigation because suspects can parrot those facts. Did the defendant in this case parrot any facts?
No, sir.
We also heard Mr. Aarons ask you about the defendant wearing shorts and whether you could have given him more clothing earlier. Did he ever ask for more clothing?
No, sir, he did not.
Were those the clothes that he chose to wear?
Yes, sir.
And then Mr. Aarons also asked you about whether the clips were played out of order. So let me ask you, did the defendant ever give you a linear story?
Not once ever during the interview.
We also heard Mr. Aarons ask about the notification.
Yes, sir.
Now, in the interview, the defendant admitted to you that he knew Victoria was dead. Is that right?
Yes.
In fact, he referred to her as the body.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So was he notified that she was dead?
After that,
Or did he know that she was dead?
he was told eventually during the interview, yes.
Let me ask it this way. When he was notified by the detectives that she was dead, do you know whether or not he already knew she was dead?
At the time, no.
And based on his later admission to you?
Yes. This was very clear. Initially, he said, I had no idea she was dead. And then later on in the interview, he admitted to knowing that she was deceased and saw everything happen.
I'm going to play a clip again for you just so you can see the action here.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, may I play with captions?
Any objection?
Yes, Your Honor. May we approach?
Come on up. watch it with captions when you deliver it.
What happened? So listen, you need to be honest, because I know that you helped cut her up. No, stop. Stop. I know you helped cut her up, but also know you got threatened. All right?
I didn't help cut that little girl up. I didn't, but I seen it.
You need to be
I
honest.
seen Jessica do it, okay? But she threatened me with, that I'm gonna get killed. Just like she's gonna kill Michelle. I seen Jessica do it, yes. I did. I'm just scared for retaliation.
Okay, so listen.
She's just out of prison. And I don't want her to come threaten me and my family.
Listen, I know that she threatened to kill you, but I also know that she threatened to kill you to help her. Because she's not going to go down just by herself.
I didn't listen to that, no.
If you did and you were threatened, we can explain that. Because that's the thing. I already talked to Michelle. I didn't, stop. You've already lied about a lot of stuff, and now you're admitting to this.
What I'm saying is I seen it happen. I just didn't want to admit it right away. But I didn't have no part of it. But yes, I did see it. And I got threatened with a knife. Okay? I was scared. I didn't know if there was anyone else there or anyone else outside that Jessica was saying. Okay? But I did not help her do that. No, no.
Okay, I also know that you guys weren't asleep when you guys got hit, and that whole thing didn't happen because, again,
We were all we were laying down with the lights off, going to bed. We weren't all the way, like I was telling you, we weren't all the way in the dead state. We were like 20, 30 minutes getting ready for it. You know, after you're tossing and turning, you're getting comfy. Okay? And that's when Jessica came and said that weird shit.
so listen, man, again, I'm asking you to be honest. If you really were threatened, if you were threatened to keep your mouth shut, I understand that. See, that's something we can explain.
I understand, but what I'm going to try to say is I didn't do anything to that little arch lecture, but I seen it. Okay? I seen Jessica doing it.
What did you see?
Her standing and doing that.
You need to be honest, man. Doing what? I'm giving you the opportunity.
Standing there, trying to say how about, but I'm going to like now. I didn't. But I seen her do it.
What did you see her do?
I seen her snapping at her, cutting at her, weird, like crazy.
Show me on a piece of paper. Okay, go ahead and sit down. I'm gonna give you a piece of paper.
Hey, guys,
Show me, it's okay, but this is important for us to know, okay?
Listen, you gotta trust me. Alright? I'm not here to blow smoke up your butt, dude.
Yeah,
This is a serious case.
I understand.
What you don't understand is you lied to me the first time I talked to you.
Because I was threatened, I was scared.
And we understand that, so here, Fabian, show me how the cuts were made and who did what cut. It's very important, okay? Because then we can figure out what involvement you had, what involvement you didn't have, and where you felt, threatened, and we know you're scared, okay? So that's why it's really important, and I know you've been through a lot, but this is important, okay?
I just seen Jessica and stuff in the room.
Okay, so you're in the bedroom, in Victoria's bedroom.
No, I just when I was stopping it, okay, I see Jessica doing.
Okay, well, you want cuts like this or something, so
Yeah,
show
like
me
that.
on, okay, so a cut is different than a stab.
Boom, and that card, I don't mean actually she was doing.
So were you in the hall?
She was trying to, yes.
Okay, so you're in the hall, and let me see your pen real quick. Okay, and is Victoria, is she laying on the bed? Is she on her back or on her
I
stomach?
think she was laying on the bed.
Is she on her back, face up, or face down?
I don't know if she was face up or face down, but I'm thinking, but I know she was on the bed.
Okay, so we know
Yes. Okay.
that
I know, I just.
you saw enough or
I
took
did
part
see
enough to describe the cuts and the limbs coming
I
off,
saw
so.
Jessica doing it and I was scared, I was screaming and
Doing
telling
what?
her stop.
Okay.
Doing that to the little girl.
You need to be.
That's Michelle, I'm telling you that.
No, listen, you need to be descriptive.
Yeah.
Okay, Jessica was just going off and then hitting the body, like going crazy, trying to I just would do this, like say weird things, let me, Michelle, I'm like, Jessica, no, stop. And she wasn't listening, she was just doing it, but we didn't stop it because we were scared.
Brown, in that clip that we just saw,
Yes, sir.
the defendant was making gestures like this.
Yes, sir.
Is that right? And did you hear Detective Gonzales, did she say, well, a cut is different than a stab?
Say that again?
Did she say a cut is different than a stab?
Yes.
So when there was a discussion of cutting earlier with the defendant, that's not the same thing as a discussion of stabbing.
Correct.
Did any of the detectives make this motion?
No, sir. Nobody made that motion at all.
Now, there was some discussion of Michelle Martin's interview.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember seeing on the defendant's phone a text from the defendant to Michelle asking her to do a line with him and Jessica?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Did Michelle, in her interview, did she tell you that that line that he asked about, that meant meth?
She did.
So Michelle already knew about that. Is that fair?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
So the detective didn't introduce the idea of meth to her. Would that be
That's
accurate?
correct. Yes, sir.
Now, we also heard Mr. Ahrens call her in an interview a false confession.
Yes, sir.
Was everything she said false?
No.
When she told you that the defendant asked her to do a line of meth with him, was that true or false?
That was accurate, sir.
Did she provide a number of different statements that matched the evidence?
Yes, sir.
And then she provided other statements that were later determined not to match the evidence. Would that be fair?
That is correct, sir.
We heard questions about Michelle being in a traumatized state. Do you often interview suspects following a homicide after a traumatic event?
Yes, sir.
Is that sort of the nature of a homicide?
Yes, sir, it is.
Does that prevent them from providing voluntary or truthful statements?
No, sir.
Would it be fair to describe Michelle as unique?
Yes, sir.
What happened in her interview, have you had that happen in other interviews before?
No, sir.
And when it was determined that the evidence did not match her statements, who hired a nationally renowned psychiatrist to examine Michelle?
The district attorney's office.
And after that examination, who modified the charges against all defendants to match the evidence?
The district attorney's office.
In that clip that we just watched, Sergeant Brown, you said be honest.
Yes, sir.
Is your goal in an interview to get a confession, or is it to get a truthful statement?
It's to get a truthful statement, sir.
After the defendant admitted that he had been lying to you,
Yes, sir.
did he ever say that Victoria ingested meth?
No, sir.
Did he ever say he sexually assaulted Victoria?
No, sir.
Did he say any of the things that Michelle said were later determined to be false?
No, sir, he did not.
Did the defendant need medical attention that day?
I believe he was evaluated for a little cut, but no.
Did he decline medical attention?
Yes.
And the defendant has been described by several witnesses as acting normal at the scene after the police were called. Would you say that's accurate?
That's correct, sir.
You were asked about whether you believe the defendant and Michelle got together to concoct a story. Did you have information from the neighbors that the defendant met Michelle in the parking lot before they went to apartment 407?
Yes, sir.
Did you have information from the neighbors that the defendant and Michelle both went out the front door?
Yes, sir, we did.
Did Michelle and the defendant both use the word fishy to describe Jessica's paranoid behavior?
Yes, sir, they did.
Is it unusual for a suspect to use the word fishy in an interview?
Very, and that's why, again, we believe that there may have been some type of concoction with the story.
You heard testimony that when the defendant went to apartment 407 and Michelle joined up with him,
Yes,
she asked about her phone several times.
that's correct.
And the defendant said to her each time, remember, she took our phones.
That's correct.
And when someone suggests an answer like that, does that support the idea of a rehearsed story?
Yes, sir, it does.
Do you use crime scene tape and have the crime van come out to a simple domestic battery?
No, sir.
Is it reasonable for anyone to think that?
No, sir.
Well, you saw lapel video of Michelle going under the crime scene tape
Yes, sir.
and asking if she could have the defendant ride with her to the hospital.
Yes, sir.
And you also talked to us about the defendant being more concerned about talking to Michelle than he was about what happened to Victoria.
That's correct.
Sustained.
So, Sergeant Brown, in the context of what you were dealing with,
Yes, sir.
did Michelle's behavior and the defendant's behavior indicate that they had rehearsed the story?
Yes, sir, was the indication that I believed.
Did the defendant tell you about another instance of trying to control her when he told her about, and we heard it on the clip yesterday, when he told her, or threatened or warned Michelle that she better not talk about his drug-dealing brother?
Yes, sir.
Is that a red flag?
Yes, sir.
Let me ask you, are you the only detective who uses the tactic of lying to a suspect to try to elicit a truthful confession?
No, sir.
Are you the only detective who uses statements that may or may not have been made by a co-defendant as a means to elicit a truthful confession?
No, sir.
Are those standard interview techniques?
Yes, sir, they are.
Mr. Ahrens asked you about the defendant saying that he woke up at 1:40 a.m.
Yes, sir.
to Jessica Kelly hitting Michelle with an iron.
Yes, sir.
And he suggested, well, maybe that's like the night before, when he was wrong about the time.
That's correct.
Why did the defendant think it was 1:40 a.m.?
Because Jessica Kelly told him, according to him.
And how did Jessica Kelly know what the time was?
He said that she looked at the phone and said it's 1:40 in the morning.
So the previous night, had he mentioned that someone looked at a phone and saw the time?
No, sir.
Was he estimating?
Yes.
And we heard from Monica Ramirez Rivera about hearing two people on the balcony, one of them wanting to talk, a female wanting to talk, and a male saying, let's go inside. Is that right?
That is correct, sir.
And was that about 1:40 a.m.?
Yes, sir.
We also heard a discussion from Mr. Ahrens about your grand jury testimony.
Yes, sir.
So let me ask you, when you testified before the grand jury, did you have the benefit of 4 additional years of investigation?
No, sir.
Did you have phone records?
No, sir.
Did you have DNA records?
No, sir.
Did you testify to the best of your knowledge at the time?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was your testimony truthful?
Yes, sir, it was.
And at the time that you testified to the grand jury, had you consulted a pathologist in this case?
Yes, sir.
Did you ask a pathologist about those stabbing motions the defendant made?
Yes, sir.
Did you ask if that could be consistent with Victoria's wounds?
Yes, sir.
Did you consult with an expert physician in the area of child abuse, child sexual abuse?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, did she testify to the grand jury?
Yes, sir, she did.
Did she explain to the grand jury a medical finding of relatively deep anal tears?
Objection?
Judge, I'll withdraw the question.
Okay. It's sustained.
So let me ask you, Sergeant, I apologize.
That's okay.
So when you believed that there was a sexual assault that occurred in this case,
Yes, sir.
was that based only on Michelle Martin's statement?
No, sir.
When Victoria was found in the bathtub, did she have any clothing below the waist?
No, she did not.
Were her underwear in a trash can?
Yes, they were.
Did they appear to have blood on them?
Yes, they did.
We talked about yesterday about drug results. So let me ask you this. Did you think about getting a warrant to determine whether any of these defendants had drugs in their system?
No, sir.
Why is that?
Because we didn't have any indication that they were under the influence at the time.
And what time were they interviewed?
The second interview for Fabian was at 1, or after 1, and then, so they were later in the afternoon. Everybody was interviewed. Much later than the incident.
Do you have any information about that until those interviews?
No, sir.
And what does it mean to you that the interviews took place potentially 12 hours after the incident in this case, in terms of getting a drug test?
It means after 12 hours, it gives the body plenty of time to essentially dissipate and metabolize anything that could have been in their system.
So in terms of your initial impressions at the crime scene,
Yes, sir.
were those initial impressions based on what you saw at the crime scene and what evidence was available?
Yes, sir.
And was that impacted by the fact that there had been extensive cleanup in the apartment?
Yes, sir.
If the crime scene had been more pristine when you arrived, would you have had better information about this case?
Probably.
Then I'm going to have a moment.
You may.
Your Honor, I just have a few more questions, but if we could have a discussion in the jury room, please.
Sure. gonna break for an early lunch. We have some work to do over the lunch hour. And so I'm gonna make it a little bit longer too, so that we can get it done and not have you sitting around. So I'm gonna bring you back at, let's do 1:15. And we'll start at that point, okay? All rise to adjourn.